The last several weeks, we've been looking at this idea of what's the gospel according to you, right? Like, what's the story of Jesus that God is telling with your life? What's the gospel according to you? And that's an important story. It's one that needs to be told. And so we've taken the last several weeks and we've looked at the different gospels that are in the Bible to help us think through the lens of how can we shape the Jesus story that's being told within our life. So week one, we looked at Matthew. And in Matthew, we saw there's this sense of legacy that Matthew gives to us. That the gospel according to Matthew is a lot about legacy that's taking place. And so we were inspired to think through the lens of what's the Jesus story of our life, of all the people, all the things that have happened, the foundation that's been given to us of our Jesus story. And for some of us, we might need to live into the story that we've been given. For others of us, we might need to change the direction of the legacy that we've been given within our life. But just to think through, like, what am I standing on? Whether it's a solid foundation or a shaky one, just to acknowledge it and begin to think about moving forward. And then 2 weeks ago, we looked at the Gospel of Mark. And Mark was a lot about what? Anybody remember? I only remember because I had to review it this week, so I'm with you. Urgency. So Mark, there's a sense of urgency. Jesus goes from here to here. He's always on the move. He starts right out, and we get, right, Mark 1's like right into the temptation narrative. He's already beginning to do work. It's very quick. There's this sense that with Mark, that life, we're reminded that life is finite. And we just talked about the reality that sometimes I just think in my mind that I'm just going to live forever. And not like live forever like I'm going to go die with Jesus, like I won't die kind of deal. Like I live that way. I don't live with a sense of urgency within my life. We are challenged to think through the lens of, what is it that God has for me in my life, like this week? Like what's in front of me, the conversations that I have, the people I interact with. Do I just go through the motions and miss people within my life? Or am I actually fully present the way that I need to be? And then last week we looked at the Gospel of Luke, and Luke is the most detailed of the Gospels. I mean, he takes a number of chapters before we even get to the birth of Jesus. And there's this sense with Luke that every little detail matters, and that in the detail, he's able to speak with certainty of the things of Jesus. And so we were challenged to think through the lens of, do I think of my life and my Jesus story? Do I record the moments? Can I tell the story of Jesus in such a way that there'd be certainty of his work in my life, that it would impact other people? In other words, Luke is about kind of what you bring to the table when it comes to the gospel according to you. And so today we're going to finish that up looking at the Gospel of John. John is different than the other three, okay? The other three, just a little theological stuff. You probably don't care about this, but it might help you someday. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke are called synoptic gospels. Fancy word for they're similar. And so Mark was the earliest one written, and then it's as if Matthew and Luke had a copy of Mark's in front of them, and they told their story kind of using Mark as an outline. So they're called synoptic gospels. Now, John is totally different. John, right from the get-go, you can tell that something's going to be different. His stands alone. Here's what it reminds me of. Any Star Wars fans? Okay? Every couple years, right, you finally get into the theater. It's probably like the one movie I actually pay to go see in a theater. We just, for whatever reason, have gotten out of the whole movie deal. I know that's a sin for some of you guys, but I'll just have to work it out. But sitting in the theater, and then all of a sudden, all the previews get done, and then it's the yellow words, right? The yellow words, and they start going, and you just know, like, whatever happens after that, it's going to be 2 hours of an amazing story of good versus evil, and it's going to feel like a lot of the way that evil's going to win, but in some way, shape, or form, good is going to win out. That's the Gospel of John. Star Wars stole it from him. Star Wars stole it from him. For real, right? Lord of the Rings stole it from John. Okay? Mission Impossible stole it from John. Right. It is that epic story. And so the Gospel of John kind of starts out, we're going to read today, feels like to me it's the yellow words. It's the yellow words that's setting up for this great story of this great battle that's going to be happening. John wants to remind us that the one who created all things comes to us. All right? So we only come to God because God first came to us. Does that make sense? So if you're taking notes, if you've got your little hear and obey note in your phone that you've been, using, just, if that stands to you, jot that down. Like, we only come to God because God first came to us. And God came in Jesus to not make it wrong, but to make it right. Now, I think there are a lot of folks within our culture today that when they think about the church and Jesus, they think like it's kind of a message of making it wrong and not making it right. I think there's a lot of work that we need to do as followers of Jesus to recover the essence of what this is. The reality is we don't come to God. Like we only come to Him because He first came to us. And He didn't come to us so that it would be worse. He came to us to make it right within our life. John wants to remind us that darkness is not good and that Christmas is a time to remember that God will not turn a blind eye to brokenness, to need, to hopelessness, to death. That God will not turn a blind eye, but God will send true light in Jesus. And John wants to remind us that this true light that has come, the darkness cannot overcome it. Guys, it's the yellow words, all right? I mean, like this is John's gospel. That light has won, that we now belong to a king. His name is Jesus, and that life with Jesus is certain today and tomorrow and forever. All right? Like, that's what John wants us to know today. Now, here's the problem that I have in my life. Sometimes I want to live in my flesh. And I think you guys are faced with that same temptation within your life. When I'm living in my flesh, here's what I do. In light of the truth of John's gospel, when I'm in my flesh, I live as if darkness has not been overcome. I live as if darkness has not been overcome. I live as if darkness will often have the last say. And when I'm living that way, I'm living full of pessimism, doubt, and blame. And so when I find myself pessimistic, doubtful, blaming, passing the buck around, it's often because I'm living in my flesh and living in a way that the darkness has not been defeated. Now, my hunch is that you all find yourself in those places too. I know some of you do because I see it on Facebook, which is a whole nother conversation we probably should have. In my flesh, I'll live from a place of negativity instead of from a place of hope. And when I live from a place of negativity, I'm full of judgment. Oh, I can judge you so well. I mean, I can point out all the little specks in your all's eyes. When I'm living from a place of negativity, I dwell in judgment instead of living from a place of hope where I dwell in grace. Okay? Where I dwell in grace. When I'm living in my flesh, I can live a defeated life as if Jesus never came and as if the Gospel of John was never written. So when I'm living in my flesh, when I'm living a defeated life, when you're living a defeated life, we're living as if Jesus never came and as if the Gospel of John was never written. But here's the good news. Here's the good news. The good news is this. Jesus did come. Darkness is defeated. It is overcome. And we know all of that because we have the Gospel of John. It is that great conquest. And so if you're ever in a place in your life where you're feeling defeated, you're feeling pessimistic, you're feeling doubtful, you feel consumed with darkness, just you need to make a note. The place you need to go is the Gospel of John. And it starts out with the yellow letters, all right? The yellow letters. Okay, here we go. We're going to read this morning, if you got your Bibles with you, 1 through 5, 10 through 8. I mean, how hideous is this shirt, you guys? Like, oh my gosh. So embarrassed. The game is on. It is so on. All right, here we go. And they didn't even come today. Oh my gosh. All right, here we go. In the beginning was the Word, right? I mean, it's Star Wars. In the beginning, they stole it. I'm telling you, they stole it. Well, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to steal. I mean, good gracious, wait till you hear this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, what's that make you think of real quick? Think about the scope of Scripture. Like, where do you go? Genesis, right? Genesis. And how does God create in Genesis? He speaks, right? He speaks. And John's like, look, what he was speaking with, that same Word that spoke things into existence, it's getting ready to get real, right? Like literally real. It's called, it's a baby, Jesus, all right? And the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. In Him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. I mean, like, that feels like I want to be a part of that team. That one right there. I want to belong to that one. I mean, whenever you're in a place, let's just face it, there's so often within our lives, we get complacent. I get complacent in being a follower of Jesus. I get complacent going through the motions. I get to Sunday and I'm like, how much longer is this going to take? And Jared's like, well, if you don't preach so long, it won't take so long, you know? But like, I go through the motions, but it's in these sacred texts. This is what I'm part of. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. It's not that the darkness didn't try to overcome it. That, my friends, brothers, sisters, like that's good news because life feels dark at times, doesn't it? How many of you have been in a dark place in the past year? How many of you guys have felt some darkness in your life? How many of you have people that you love that are grounded in what feels like some darkness? Well, the story we belong to, the yellow words on our screen, is the darkness has not overcome the light. All right, verse 10, we're going to jump down. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to his own people, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. I mean, again, if we just think through the lens of Genesis, God creates humans in whose image? His image. On the sixth day, we were created in His image. Like God intended for you and me, for you and us, humanity, to be His children. And He said, you get to choose. You can hang out with me here in my home. It's a lovely garden. We walk in the cool of the evening each night. There's no death here. There's no sin. It's pretty much the deal. Or you can do your own thing. And if you do your own thing, it kind of just means that you give your birthright back to me and say, I don't want what you have. That would be a bad move. That's called missing the mark. That's sin. And that's what we did. That's what we did. Well, John's saying, look, Jesus is coming into the world to square all that back away so that those who would believe would now get their birthright back. Like we'd be a part of God's family. That God would look at you and me and say, that's my boy, that's my girl, and we would get to rest that today, tomorrow, and from ever. Who were born, verse 15, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And anyways, God is doing this, not you. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Anybody ever read the Message Bible? Eugene Peterson says, it's like this. The Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. It's the idea that now the Word has now come flesh, dwells among us. And we have seen His glory, glory of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. I'm going to skip down to verse 16, a little parentheses about John. For from His fullness we have all received grace upon grace. Okay? Now, grace upon grace is simply this. When I think about some of the broken places of my life, some of the damage that I've done with my life, like if you and I just went kind of, tit for tat just together and just listed out all things, I'm sure there's some of you in here that got me, but I've probably got most of you, all right? And grace upon grace is this. It's not that you don't have to deal with any of that, Chad. Grace upon grace is not that. Grace upon grace is not that, not that we just forget about it. It's that whole forgiveness piece from earlier. It's like, I won't hold that against you. And the grace upon grace is just when you think maybe you'll hold that one against me. No, there's even more grace. I won't hold it against you. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who is at the Father's side. He has made Him known. In Jesus, Jesus is making God the Father known. Those are the other words. I mean, does that make sense? Like, it's John setting up this epic conquest and battle that's going to take place. Jesus came in the flesh to be with us. Some people call Jesus Emmanuel, which means God with us. That now God will never leave us. He will never forsake us. In John's gospel, what John is saying is this, is God has the last say and the victory. Darkness and everything about it is defeated, and it will be pushed out. And so just again, when I find myself, when you find yourself in those deep, dark places where it feels like I'm being consumed, there is not a way out. It is John's message of Jesus that reminds us that darkness will not win. It will be pushed out. So now we can live in this truth. And the truth is this, that we can receive grace in our own battle and be an instrument of grace in the battle of others. Does it make sense? So for John's gospel, according to him, we are in a battle. Okay? We are in a battle. And the battle is not flesh and blood. And in our own battle, we need to receive grace, and then we need to be an instrument of grace in the battles of others. So we need to receive it, and then be an instrument of it in the battle of others. Here's a couple ways this week that I've seen this at play in my life. So we had a staff meeting on Monday, and it just really shook me. Just we were reading, I don't know if you guys read the scriptures on Monday, but it was the story of Mary, and just this idea that God, when God comes to us, He disrupts our lives. As God, have you ever felt like God's disrupting your life? If you don't, then it's another thing we need to think about. Like, that's what God does. He disrupts our life. And we were sitting there on Monday and just reading through that and thinking through it, praying through it. And I just felt God say this to me. I felt like He said, Chad, would you just stop trying to do it yourself? would you just let me do it? I'm like, what do you mean? He says, let me do it. Do you know those words? I'm like, well, how do I let me do it? I'm like, okay. So it's staff meeting, and at lunch, I ran out to Sanford real quick. I was meeting some guys about some softballs. He had some softballs on Craigslist. Can we play softball? They're expensive. Those were cheap. I was kind of wondering, did he steal them? Didn't know, like, whatever. So, but I'm headed out there. So go out, get my softballs. I turn around to get in my car, and he goes, hey, I saw your little signature on your email. Are you a pastor? And I thought, oh, this is not going to go anywhere good. And I was so close to being like, no, I got to go. And he's like, I'm like, yeah, I am. He's like, I am too. And we started talking, and I've never found, like in Fayetteville, I've never found like we've had the food hookup yet in the city. We've had a bunch of different things that God's called us to, medical missions internationally, and I always feel like the Lord needs to reveal things to us in His timing, but we've never just really had like a food hookup, so people would call and say, hey, can you get food? I was like, well, you can go there, and this guy has a friend in Atlanta that has 300,000-foot warehouses that's full of food, and all of these vendors bring truckloads of food. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? He said, well, I'll just tell you this. There's no child in Pittsburgh, North Carolina that's hungry on the weekend because we get free food from him all the time. I'm like, how big's your church? He said, we have like 35 people. I'm like, what? I said, so tell me about this. Tell me what happens like. He said, well, you can go down and get it, or you can get it shipped up on an 18-wheeler. And I said, well, how much is that? He said, about $2,000 to $4,000. I'm like, okay. I said, how much food is on an 18-wheeler? He said, well, between 18 and 22 pallets. I said, well, how much is that? He said, on the low end, about $20,000 worth of food. On the high end, about $50,000 worth of food. I said, hold on. Are you lying? Like, are you? What? It's amazing, right? $2,000 to $4,000, $40,000 worth of food. I'm like, there should be no hungry kids where I live. Like now, Anyways, like that morning, God's like, will you let me do it? I'm just going to get softballs. That's all I'm doing. I'm just going to get softballs. My point is that we have to be able to receive grace in our own battles, okay? We got to receive grace in our own battles. Later on this week, there were a couple folks that had been on my heart and just kind of felt like the Lord was saying, hey, you guys you need to go hang out. So I was able to hang out with them and just talk through some things going on in their life this week. And as I was talking with them, I just realized that God was giving me just some language I thought that would help them. And I just said to them, hey, would it be helpful if I wrote this stuff down for you? Just so you could remember it. And like, yeah, that'd be super helpful. And, I went home, and the next day I just took a few moments and just wrote down just some things that could potentially have been forgotten or not heard how to articulate that might really be helpful in a situation that's going on in their life. Like, we also need to be instruments of grace in the battles of others. Okay? So can you and I, as followers of Jesus, can you be someone who receives grace in your own battle, which is God saying, let me fight for you. Let me fight for you. Stop trying to fight in your own flesh. Let me do it. I'm better at it than you are. I am the light that has overcome the darkness, not you. I am the one that when it's me versus death, I win. I am the one who now has called you a child. Me, I've done it. So you stop doing it and receive grace. Let me do it. And then we need to be instruments of that same grace in the battles of others that we walk with. Part of the gospel according to you, part of the gospel according to me, is living into that truth regardless of the circumstances of your life. Let me just say that again. I think it's so important. Living from this truth, receiving grace or being an instrument of grace, regardless of the circumstances of your life, is a part of the gospel according to you that I need to hear, that we need to hear, that we need to walk in. And I think it starts like this. This is how you do it. Jesus, I know that you are true light. Will you push out this darkness? I invite you in. So if you're in a dark place in your life, you got something going on that just seems broken. Jesus, I know you are true light. Will you push out this darkness in my life? Jesus, show me where I need to live out this truth, not in the doubt of my flesh, but in the faith of my spirit. Part of the gospel according to you is this storyline, is the storyline of this epic battle of good versus evil, flesh versus spirit. It is partly our responsibility, your and my responsibility to track, record, testify to God, Jesus' victory within our life. Like people need to hear how God is overcoming darkness in your life and through you in the lives of other people. So I need to record it, I need to track it, I need to be able to talk about it within my life, the way that Jesus is bringing victory to you and the way He's using you to bring victory to others. There are always those moments in all those Star Wars movies. I mean, any of them. I mean, you just pick one. I'm telling you, it's the Gospel of John. There's always moments where it looks like the bad guys are going to win. Right? Always. And even though, like, in my gut, I know Luke's going to win. He's up on a mountain right now. I have no idea what he's going to do, but Luke's going to win. Even though I know that, there's still, in the moment, there's a piece of me, it's like, maybe he won't. Maybe something will turn. Maybe it won't happen. But in the end, in some way, good always wins. That's your life. That's the story that you belong to. And in the end, it's because of Jesus that God has victory within your life. So, just as we close today, just as you get ready for Christmas, as you start thinking about the gospel according to you, what's your legacy? What's been given to you? What's the urgency of your life when it comes to the daily moments of how you're living? What are the details of the story of Jesus in your life where you could share with certainty, this is what God is doing in my life? And how is God bringing the victory of good over evil into your life where you're receiving grace and you're an instrument of grace for those that are around you? And I just think if you'll begin framing your life, your Jesus story in that way, you'll be able to tell the gospel according to you. And I just think one of the responsibilities of all of us who are followers of Jesus is to be able to tell that story when God gives us opportunities to do so. Good?